Hello everyone and welcome back to Nate the Hoof Guy. Today's video, we're going to be dealing with this defect right here. You can see where this mark is, but guess what? The problem is going to be up much higher once we get working on this. Let's get started. Now I've talked about this before, where that mark in the sole is not going to necessarily point you to where that problem is with the corium. In fact, most of the time, it's not going to point to it at all. It's going to be much higher than that. That's due to the way these problems form inside that claw. What you have to understand when we're looking at hooves is that what we're seeing now actually happened many months earlier when that hoof was formed. We're going to get a couple different examples of that with this particular foot. Not only with this white line, but if you look over to that typical sole ulcer site, you're going to see a little bit of redness there as well. Now that redness, a lot of people would say, well, why don't you need to investigate that? Being able to determine when these things happen in that timeline can tell you whether or not we need to investigate it. Now here, I can see, it's pretty obvious. I knew ahead of time, but for you to see it now, you can see where that redness is in those outer layers. But up underneath that, it's perfectly clean hoof. That's because that disturbance, whatever was causing that problem many months ago, has resolved. And what we're seeing now is just the aftermath of that. The same thing is true with this white line. The perforation in that white line that has allowed the bacteria to enter this actually started happening many months earlier. It's just now becoming a problem. Let's watch this back and fast forward. You can see how that mark moves up that sole. Now the difference between the two in this situation is that redness in that typical sole ulcer site, that problem resolved itself and we have good horn formation underneath that. With this white line, that problem did not resolve itself. Now I don't know if you can tell by the shape of this claw, but we're dealing with some medial claw rotation here, a little bit of corkscrew claw rotation, and that's what's caused, or what's prevented, I should say, this white line from forming correctly. Those pressures being applied to that claw made that white line vulnerable to this situation. And ultimately, over time, this is the result. Now, the next obvious thing is if you can figure out what the problem is, how do we just prevent these from happening in the first place? And that's when it comes down to maintenance trimming. Preventative maintenance trimming. Now that's what we do on all the farms that I operate on. We do that, but even still, you're going to have these few cases that happen. If you look at this foot, it's not terribly overgrown. This corkscrew is not terribly out of hand, and yet there was enough pressure there to cause this perforation. You got to realize this particular farm has about 1,600 cows on it, and I might treat a couple of white lines in a month there, which isn't terrible when you consider that many animals. So trying to be able to identify and predict every single instance is going to be almost impossible. So what we can do, and the only thing we really can do, is try to keep up on that maintenance program to try to limit these as much as possible. As far as putting shoes on the cow's feet, in this case, those rubber blocks that I applied at the other claw, doing that on all the cows, on all their feet, all the time is, number one, cost prohibitive, but also number two, it just is not a reliable solution to this problem. You've seen in many of my videos, these blocks fall off over time. And if that were to happen on odd claws and odd situations, this cow would be terribly unbalanced and be walking would have one block on one claw, one block on another claw. That would not be a good situation. That being said, I am going to put a block on this other claw now to protect this one. Obviously, in this instance, we need to have a block on there. We're going to do our best to keep that block on so that we can get this to resolve itself. Zoomed in here, you can really see the disintegration in that white line. Our last step with this particular claw is to get it nice and clean, and then we're going to apply a salicylic acid wrap to that. And there you have it. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you all on the next one.